Hi, I'm Chloe Canning. Welcome back for Season 2 on Lead with Courage. Luminate Leadership acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land, which we would call this podcast the Yagara and Terrible people. We pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging.
Welcome to Lead with Courage, the podcast that celebrates the bold and inspiring stories of leaders making a difference. We're your hosts, Andy and Cherie Canning, and together we'll dive into the minds of the trailblazers, the risk takers, and those who embrace life with a growth mindset. Welcome back to Lead with Courage. Today's episode is a special one. My friend Ash Conwell is joining the conversation, and this woman personifies courage. I feel extremely grateful and privileged that Ashley has chosen to sit down and discuss with us her experience of blooming through grief. Please note that this conversation is a big one. We'll be discussing grief and loss, mental health and preterm birth. If this isn't the conversation for you today, that's okay. Please join us on one of the other episodes. In the meantime, I want to share again a heartfelt thanks to Ash for coming on and her generosity and courage for this conversation. So a special welcome to a longtime friend and an extremely courageous woman, my friend Ashley. Welcome to the Lead with Courage podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is wonderful to be here and really feeling quite privileged and honoured that you're here to share part of your story and your versions of leading with courage over the last few years in particular. Before we jump into your story, Ash, as you know, all of our podcast guests, we ask one question, which is, what does lead with courage mean to you?
I actually think this is a really hard question, particularly the first question, because I actually think leading with courage is one of the hardest things to do as a human. To me, leading with courage is about facing fears. It's those tricky situations, blocking out the external pressures of others. But also often blocking out your own imposter syndrome or that negative self-talk. So it's really tricky. But I also think that the time to lead with courage is often when the pain to remain in a bud is more painful than the risk to open and bloom.
I love that quote. I love that concept.
That's hard. You know, for a flower to blossom, it takes a lot of work. It's the right environment, but it's also nourishment and rest. And I think that we often forget about that when we talk about courage, that it's not just being out there all the time, that it actually includes that component. So sometimes a flower, if we think about that concept, sometimes a flower blossoms beautifully and it's bold and bright and vibrant, but then sometimes a flower is quite small and not so vibrant. Or there's times when the flower doesn't blossom and it stays in the bud. So that's how I think of courage, and particularly in the context of just personal courage and leading with courage in life. So, for us as humans, I think we're the same. You know, it's not easy, it's slow and it's gradual. But leading with courage, despite the hard work, brings so much beauty and growth.
Ash, that is one of my favourite responses to that question. I love it. I'm thinking about the frangipani tree on my deck and how last winter Andy actually threw it in the bin because he said, all the flowers are gone, it's dead. I'm like, no, that's just a frangipani. It's what happens in the winter. It loses its leaves, it loses its flowers, and then it comes back to be the most beautiful plant.
Orchids are the same. They're really hard to keep alive, but they need that time and then they come back.
Yes, all the care of the orchid. Which none of which I'm very good at doing for the plants.
No, please don't ever gift me a plant. It's so stressful.
No, absolutely. A photo of one would be lovely. But with all sincerity, that is so true. And how often I think it's about the charge. We think about charging and going and doing the things rather than the rest and restoration. So beautiful.
And allowing that flower that time, you know, and we're just as delicate.
If not possibly more. They're very predictable. We know exactly what's happening with the flower and the plant, but for us there's so many situations at play. So I love that. Thank you. So Ash, one of the reasons or the themes that we want to talk about today, and we definitely don't want this conversation to be a sob story, I suppose, which it sounds a bit harsh even saying that. It's not the intention, is it? This intention
that was my
is
words
about,
as well. Yeah.
They were your words, so I'm echoing that back. So thank you for not making me look like I'm just harsh. But the intention here is to share for you over the last 4 years, an experience of leading courage through grief. Could you share a little bit about what has led you to this part of the conversation and what's been happening for you over the last few years?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So many of us have a story from the year 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I was 29 at the time, and my story went like this. So in January, I lost my father-in-law, who I adored, after a very short and aggressive illness. In March, I was stood down from my role at Flight Centre due to the unfolding COVID pandemic. But just 3 months later in June, my husband and I were delighted to find out that we were actually pregnant, which was a real dream of ours. 3 weeks after that, we found out that we were welcoming not 1, but 3 babies into the world, which was obviously a big shock to hear triplets.
Yes.
But also so much gratitude and excitement for that. So that was June for us, really exciting time. Then in August, we celebrated our wedding anniversary. And I never imagined that it would be our last wedding anniversary together. The following week, my husband went out for his usual morning run, but never returned home. He passed away in an accident, and that's when my life changed in an instant. I was 17 weeks pregnant with our triplets on that day, and I was absolutely broken, a complete shell of a person. As you can imagine, I desperately wanted to hide from everyone and everything, but that was impossible. I had a funeral service to plan. Every ounce of my energy went into that, and I worked tirelessly with family to create the perfect service and celebration for Matt. After the service, at 20 weeks pregnant, I felt unwell and was taken to hospital for monitoring. And it was at this point that the doctors told me, Ash, just get to 24 weeks. We can work with 24 weeks. I was absolutely terrified, and I genuinely didn't know if I could do it. So the following months were just the absolute darkest of my life. I was grieving the loss of my soulmate, but also handling the estate, all while knowing that I could lose or welcome our babies at any time. I was going to say that I didn't know how I did it, but the truth is that I believe that Matt was with me the whole time. He was in the background supporting me and making sure that I was safe. Our obstetrician still tells me that she does not know how we made it. But our beautiful trio arrived in January 2021. So they were 34 weeks, and it was an absolute miracle, considering that the goal was 24. Somehow we made it to another 10 weeks. And as you can imagine, that birth was incredibly emotional. All 3 bubs were actually resuscitated at birth, and they were rushed to the NICU immediately after delivery. 12 days later, my granddad passed away suddenly from a brain injury. I was incredibly close to my granddad as well, so this was just another devastating time. And we then went on to spend 37 days in NICU and special care. So courage was really needed at that time. For me, I just felt like I didn't have a choice but to keep showing up. I was showing up for Matt, but also showing up for our kids. Every single thing that I did was for Matt, as I felt a huge amount of grief and guilt that I was holding our babies and he wasn't. It was quite simple. Our babies needed me.
Yeah, it's struggle to find the words other than to say thank you for sharing that. How's it feel right now sharing that? I know it wouldn't have been the first time you've told that story, but maybe in such a succinct way.
Yeah, it's difficult to condense something into, just a short, brief update, I suppose. It's in some ways really incredible to look back and reflect and go, I got through that. How? Because it really felt at the time, and I used the word relentless. my life felt relentless of loss and, you know, not just loss around me, but directly impacting and such big loss. And also mixed with fear. You know, it was fear of what else was going to happen and, you know, the fear of losing the babies in that high-risk pregnancy. So it was a really numbing experience, but looking back and sharing it now, I can start to feel the appreciation of what I did.
And I was sharing with someone that you were coming on earlier last week and was giving them a bit of a background, and I was saying, you know, just in isolation, any of those things, in isolation, a career that you were just so in love with, to be on stand down through COVID. I mean, that probably feels so insignificant now compared to a lot of
and
the
yet
things.
at the time that was huge. That was a really life-defining moment for me.
Yeah.
Little did I know that would become a little blip on the radar. But absolutely, you know, career was super important to me. A job that I loved, a company that I loved, for sure. So yes, in isolation, each of those, painful.
Premi babies or
yes,
you know, yes, premi, then a multiple birth, you know, all of those things in isolation. And of course, losing Matt in isolation.
Yes.
Let alone, and then your family members as well. So, yeah, I sit here and, as you said, about we just have to, in a way, take those steps forward. But yeah, how far you've come, and that is not meant to sound condescending, but to see, you know, you walk in this morning, you've got this vibrancy, you look like you have been like beautiful amounts of sleep. You do not look like
the makeup has covered up the dark circles.
No,
then.
but you just look so well. You look so healthy. You look happy, and to me, when you hear that, only almost 4 years is quite mind blowing.
Thank you.
And I am so inspired by the way that you're approaching life. And I think that a really part of, rather than just focusing on what happened in 2020, I'd really love for us to talk about some of the ways that you're reframing life. And so much, you know, I can only describe the words of anguish and devastation, and we can't even begin to feel what you must have experienced. But how you're framing it for yourself, for your family, for the kids, it's incredibly inspiring that you don't want people's sympathy. But tell me how would you describe it now?
Yeah, sure.
How would you describe life and how the way you're positioned?
It's a lot. So, look, I really acknowledge that what I've shared is really devastating, and it's my own story, and I'm still, you know, like you in a way, quite shocked at the magnitude of what I've been through. And interesting, you know, you're saying it as well, but almost immediately after losing Matt, I had so many people around me saying things like, you're so strong, you're so brave, you're amazing, and you're an inspiration. And that was all said with so much love. I actually found those words to be somewhat insulting because for me, in that moment, I've just lost my husband, and now I'm strong, now I'm amazing, and now I'm brave. And it was a really tricky mindset thing for me.
Can you say more about that?
I think it's just the reality of the headspace that I was in.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, you know, I just don't think we say those things to people enough, to be honest with you. I think it's an element of that.
Right.
And, you know, my entire life changed in that instant. So I think it's a bit of that. It's like, oh, well, hang on, only now that I've experienced the biggest pain of my life, now I'm an inspiration. Interesting, you know, and I think it's just a combination of just the headspace that I was in, and just, really tricky to navigate that. And like I said, I absolutely acknowledge that it was said with love and support, but I couldn't see that. So I didn't see any of those qualities in myself at all. And so for me, it was tough because I saw the person that was completely broken. I was just a shell. And I was you know, I wasn't even able to string a sentence together to my family and friends, let alone outwardly. So I couldn't leave the house, and it was just, you know, really difficult. I would say it's only now, nearly 4 years later, that I am starting to see that person. And that's taken a lot of work to get there. But I actually came across a video about this earlier in the week where a fellow widow explained strength in the context of grief. So she said that it doesn't mean you're not tired. It doesn't mean you're not in pain. It doesn't mean you're not exhausted. It just means that you have the strength to keep going. And I've always shown up, even when I'm exhausted, in pain. You know, I had the armour on and I had support to get me there. I'm only able to see it now because of the support that I had. And the inner work, you know, I'm doing for myself. And I'm still doing that, and that will be lifelong. I'm really grateful and will always be grateful for the family and friends, but also the colleagues and the professional support that I had in that time, because they literally were holding me for 4 years. I also have to credit a lot of my strength to Goddess in the Boardroom, because I completed that program in 2019, and actually it was interrupted by COVID. I had no idea how much I needed that program and what that program would support me on going into 2020.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I think, though, thinking about how I frame it, it ultimately comes down to this. I didn't want to miss out on the joy. So I was in incredible amounts of pain, but I'm here and I have the great opportunity and privilege to provide our children and myself with a happy life. So don't get me wrong, I still cry heaps, like daily. But, you know, it's like I can sit at home and cry, and in some ways that would be a bit easier at times. Or I can do the best I can and get up and, you know, show that courage again. I don't want the kids to just see sad mummy. They don't deserve that. They deserve happy mummy. So that's a real driver for me. And it doesn't mean that being joyful or happy is easy or that it removes any of that pain or tragedy, because that will always be there. But it's important to me that we still live an amazing life. Yeah. That's what Matt would have wanted as well. So, you know, the kids and I, we talk about Matt multiple times a day, and he's really present in our family, and that's so important to me. The kids know him. I've shared a number of traditions with them. We go to, you know, lovely places that Matt and I loved together, and we're creating new memories.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
So it's a combination of, you know, that old tradition and new memories, and that has allowed them to build their own connection with Matt. So that's also what's helped me frame it, is the kids, and, you know, kids are so innocent and playful, so that has absolutely helped. But the other thing that is really special for us is that there is actually a sporting field, a council sporting field that's named in Matt's honour. And that is just incredible because...
Where he used to play cricket, is that right?
He never played there, but he supported the club there.
Right,
yeah.
The club, yeah.
So, and that community. So it's a really special place. And it's just another place really for the kids to see how Matt is so loved and continues to be loved. So like I said, it's sort of framing it and, like I said, not missing out on the joy.
So beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Can I circle back to what you were saying around the strength? And as you said, you know, the messages were well intended and full of love. I wonder from a practical way, and I know this is just your experience and may not be everyone's thoughts here who have had similar experiences, what would you have preferred to have heard?
No idea.
Okay. Yeah.
Honestly, it was it's a strange time for me in my grief. It was vivid and blurry at the same time, my headspace. So there's nothing, I don't know that there's anything else that could have been done differently. Okay. The support was truly incredible and I'm so grateful. I think it's just the reality of, you know, the person in the grief. And, you know, I've said to people, I'm I'm in the grief. It's my grief and I still don't know what I'm doing or I don't know what I need.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's impossible then for anyone else to know.
Yes.
So I'm really honest with that. So, yes, that was my headspace at the time to say, actually, this feels a bit insulting. That required me to do a little bit of work to go, hang on, what they're saying is truly beautiful. And I could see it, but at the time it was just too much. I didn't feel it and I couldn't see the qualities in myself. So when people are saying, you're strong, like I'm literally collapsed on the floor and have not moved for 5 days. How is that strong? Like it was a challenging concept for me, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, that's great to know. And I feel like when it comes to grief, from an outsider perspective, it's reminding yourself that it's unfair to expect a response back from the person. So I wonder, when people are saying about people were there for you and you're not in that mindset to be like, oh, thanks for that and thanks for the great feedback and, thanks for being there all the time. So I imagine for some people they might not know if they're hitting the mark or actually be like, oh, maybe I'll step back. But, I don't know what that experience was like.
Yeah, it's complicated is what I would say for both parties, that person who is in that space and the person trying to support equally hard in very different ways. I know for my family especially, they saw me broken beyond belief. So too, and they were experiencing grief while supporting me.
Yeah,
like
that's the part sometimes
hard.
We forget too, isn't it? That the people, everyone's impacted. So
absolutely,
they're going
in very
through
different
their
ways,
own, and then
and grief is so unique. So I don't think there's no right or wrong way to grieve, nor is there a right or wrong way to support someone grieving.
Yeah,
it's just really complicated, and I think it just takes awareness or just a knowingness of going, we're not going to get this right. And, there might be times that feels, tricky, but I don't know that there's a real solution.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that could have been done because everything that was done for me was incredible.
Yes.
So it's certainly not from a place of saying, oh my God, don't say I'm strong.
No,
because I needed to hear that.
Yeah, you did, but then in your own the way that you would take it on or not. And I think that in itself is almost the practical is, well, people will get it wrong and there is no one way. So just keep trying.
Yeah, and acknowledging that it's that slow burn. It's sort of back to that flower analogy really where, there's the moments of blossom and then there's the times of rest and nourishment. So it's a constant, flux between those two phases, and knowing that is not, grieving is not linear.
Yes.
We don't just get better.
You're all better now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will never heal, and I don't need or want to heal in a way because I just won't. But it's, it's a bit of a spiral, or I don't know, sometimes I actually call it a roller coaster. And when I say a roller coaster, I don't mean just, the tame ones that we have here in Australia.
That the kids can go on,
Yeah.
but the crazy triple loop ones.
Yes, probably more like the ones overseas,
Yeah.
Those free falls and stuff, because I don't think in Australia we would ever approve that type of craziness because they're so wild. I would never go on those. But, I think grief is quite unique in that sense because some people love roller coasters and they're all for it. I'm the type of person who cries and screams and swears. So
on the roller coaster, yes.
So, I think it's like that, and it's, a roller coaster has all the twists and turns and you might go backwards and free fall and all sorts of things. So I think that's another way to think about grief is that you don't just, it's not a ladder. You don't just climb up and get to the top and go, sweet, I've made it.
Yeah, yes.
There's no making it. It's a continual loop. And it can be hard at times and then it can be, great at times and lots of joy and beautiful memories as well. So, that's another way that I sort of, say that my journey is not this linear growth.
Yes, beautiful. And also when you mentioned before about I still cry, and it's the reminder for all of us, no matter what the emotion is that the two emotions can be held at the same time. So you can still experience sadness and anguish and just that grief and loss at the same time of feeling the joy and having moments with the kids and with your family. And I feel like sometimes we get so binary with emotion. I'm either positive or I'm negative, or I'm this or I'm that. That's a lesson for me that I'm learning, and just that we can hold both. Both can be true at the same time. Is that how
I would agree. Yeah. I find it tricky in my situation. Grief can really jolt you between those two emotions quite quickly, whereas I think previously I would have experienced those emotions quite in isolation. So I find that in my experience, even in a joyful moment, I can then be really going, oh, don't be happy. You know, this has happened, or, you know, how could you be happy when you've lost Matt? So I just find that grief can be a little jolting between the two emotions. But I'm also finding that as time progresses and as I continue to do the inner work with myself and, you know, the time with the kids and supporting them, I'm able to have more moments of joy and less of that jolting. But yeah, that's probably been a bit of a learning for me to allow that as well, and to go, okay, yep, I'm having a great time. There is an element of sadness, and that's okay.
Yes.
And I can still continue being happy. I don't have to completely jolt back to that sadness.
Yes.
So probably, sort of smoothing out that that jolting feeling, I suppose.
Yeah. It's so I love that. Thank you. For you, are there any practical practices that you have that when you're saying about the inner work, those things that ground you, and that may not be, when I'm asking this question, necessarily people experiencing grief, but it could be any kind of overwhelming emotion or something that's taking them from the present moment somewhere else. Have you got any grounding or practices that really work for you?
So the thing that really works for me is toddlers. They snap me out of a moment pretty quickly.
People can come and borrow yours.
So look, you know, that can sometimes be a blessing and a curse. I think at times also acknowledging and really honouring if you need to be in that emotion, because there's also times that you need that for your own growth. So it's not necessarily just about moving on from that emotion or suppressing it.
Yes.
So allowing yourself if that's what you need. And having those boundaries to support that, I suppose. For me, I was really vocal initially saying, I need help. I need a psychologist. I need professional support. I've got wonderful family and friends, and I need a professional.
Yes.
So I was very clear on that, and I'm grateful to have had the right connections to do that. And I continue that. So I'm still seeing that psychologist, which has been a really important part of my healing. So I think that's an element of those practical solutions. But everyone's different, and you know, it takes time, you know, whether it be having a bath or going for a walk. It's also a bit of trial and error.
Yes.
In finding that, and I appreciate that it can be harder for some to figure that out. And it absolutely took me time. The psychologist was something I knew I needed. The other thing that was probably less obvious or took longer for me to figure out was that I needed time to myself. Initially there was an influx of support, and then the babies were here, and you know, obviously our time in NICU was intense, followed by newborns at home.
Yes.
Times 3. So I was just a little bit busy when we got home from hospital. So part of it for me was also I felt a great sense of responsibility to act as two parents, to be there 24/7. So even when I had help 24/7 through the night as well, I went into the nursery every single time one of the kids made a noise. I wouldn't allow the person helping me to go in. That was up to me. And that was, you know, pressure that I put on myself. And everyone's saying, Ash, you know, we're here to help, And I said, yes, I know, and I'm so grateful. But I needed to do that. And at that time, that's what I needed.
Yeah.
So despite having the help available, I knew that that's what I needed for me. And that was actually part of my journey. So I was exhausted beyond belief. I think I was getting, you know, 4 hours sleep a night, broken sleep, for a solid 18 months really. But it was also what I needed at the time. Fast forward 2 years, that's when I felt I needed time for myself.
Okay.
And that's when I sort of shifted to saying, actually, can I leave the kids with mum for an hour and leave and have an hour of silence? And that was incredibly hard, way harder than I thought it would have been actually. I really struggled with that actually.
To step away and leave the kids.
Massively. Yeah. But it was a practice thing and saying, hang on, I will actually be better for it. So like I said, I think it's also just you're in different phases. You're in different phases with your grief, but you're also in different phases with healing or your own needs, and that changes. So I think that's a really important part in those practical steps is it's not just you just find something and then that's it. That's your solution. Yes. Because it's not. No. You change, your environment changes, etc. So being able to go, oh, that's actually not working for me anymore. I need to be here now.
Yes.
And I'm sure I'll find new things again in supporting that.
Yeah, and as the kids grow older and have different stages for themselves and for you, that's beautiful advice. I'm thinking about, being a working mum and also for me personally being a mum of a preemie baby, only one. But, I remember we were talking in your pregnancy about NICU world, preparing what that might look like because it was always going to be likely you were going to be there. I remember speaking to you about that earlier in 2020. One of the things that really struck me in my mum preemie journey, and so I feel like for you there's the two categories, it's the parenting and triplets and then also the grief, was how much unsolicited feedback and advice I got from people. And whilst well-meaning, I do believe that, but sometimes it really made things quite complicated and quite challenging for me personally. I'm wondering, did you have some similar experiences? What was that like for you?
Yes and no. There's an element that people went, oh my God, you've got triplets. I've got no idea what to say to you. I've got no idea how to help you.
Well, that's true.
So there was an element of that. But yeah, I think absolutely, obviously everyone really wants to help and support. And our situation was unique in NICU because we knew that the babies would be born preemie. So we knew that we would be going to NICU, whereas other families end up there in an emergency situation. Yeah. So completely blindsided.
Like us. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Regardless, nothing can prepare you for that.
No.
It's absolutely terrifying, as you know, and, it's also not how you imagine welcoming your baby into the world or babies into the world.
Yes.
It's incredibly difficult and a unique experience for every individual and every family. What was also hard for me actually at that time was, and you won't believe it, but 4 days before our babies were born, there was another set of triplets born, which is crazy because of the rarity of triplets.
Yeah. At the same hospital.
Same hospital. And they were actually in the same room as us in special care when we moved out of the NICU into special care. But that was another confronting moment for me because that family also had a little girl and 2 boys. And so I was really confronted with the family I don't have right in front of me. So that was just another layer. So NICU is like a podcast in itself, really, navigating that trauma. And I can still hear, I don't know about you, but I can still hear the alarms. I know exactly what they sound like, and I can, even smell the really intense hand soap.
Hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
And as we're recording this, I've got the computer, the recording in front of me, and it looks like a heartbeat monitor. I'm like, oh gosh. Triggering. And actually there's three lines here.
Oh yeah, just like the monitors.
Each of our microphones and then the joint one. So I'm like, oh yep, this is familiar. And then those beeps that you don't stop hearing.
Yeah, exactly. But so that in itself is that experience. But I think in addition to that advice that people give, like you say, often unsolicited, there's also expectation about what you should be doing, whether that be as a mum, whether that be as a, returning to work or whatever that looks like.
Yes.
And like you say, a lot of it is coming from a place of, of love. But I think what people don't realise is the full situation or, the fact that we're stuck in grief or trauma and that life is continuing on around us, not just other, family and friends' lives, but just society is carrying on. So that's really tricky. And for me, like I said, I didn't get a lot of advice around the kids because people just went, 3 babies, I've got no idea. But I probably say it was more around the workspace.
Right.
And so I got a lot of questions about when are you increasing your days at work? When are you coming back full time? What people didn't realise, and it's interesting because I think a lot of people go, come back to work because, you'll have adult conversation again and, don't you want a break from the kids? I did not. I felt like I needed to be there. I had trauma with that, but also I had trauma returning to work because Matt used to drive me to work every single day. So even just getting to the office came with trauma. So that's, I think, sometimes, we don't realise. And of course, no one's to know that, right? There's more to it than just, when are you coming back? So I also had zero confidence. I'd actually been out of the workforce for 2.5 years. So that was including the COVID stand down and then my maternity leave. And previously, I'm really proud. I had quite a good reputation of being confident and productive, and I just wasn't that person anymore. But people didn't know that. They knew that I'd gone through loss and that I had triplets, but they didn't understand the emotional wake that actually created for me. And, I was able to smile and essentially pretend that I was okay. But, I was very grateful as well to have the most amazing support from my leader and my colleagues. But ultimately, I was struggling just to show up and just to sit at that desk. So that was tricky. I also had a lot of pressure to have help in the house. And like I said earlier, that was definitely essential and, necessary from a practical sense, but even a safety perspective, just to have a second adult available. And so for 2 years, I had that 24/7 help. And like I said, I'm so grateful for that. And it was so essential, but it was also quite suffocating when I'm trying to grieve and be a new mum and bond with my children. But I also just felt this real desperation almost to reclaim our family home. The kids had never known our family home to just be us.
Just the 4 of you.
Yeah. So that was a real part of me. So, initially I felt this pressure to kind of appease the people who were helping me.
And are they family or they're external,
family, friends, and even nannies.
Professionals as
well.
Yeah.
So when I did start to scale back, it was purely a personal reason of going, hang on, I now need to do this for me and for the kids. And I actually felt so guilty and I really struggled. I probably stewed on it for about 2 months of even having a conversation to go, I just want to try scaling back. So I wasn't removing it, it was scaling back, and that was enormous. So I felt like I was doing something wrong and that I was upsetting those people. But I did it anyway.
Yes.
Because I just knew that it would be painful and hard, but I could see the benefit of this beautiful family sanctuary again, and that it would be our family home for the first time in 2 years. And, that was the driver. And when I did it, I actually felt this real lift from my shoulders of like, okay, this is bloody hard. It's intense, but it's us. And that was a really beautiful moment and one of the biggest milestones for our family.
Yeah, beautiful. And the courage that it took for you to share that's how you're feeling and what your desires were.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was a tough moment, but so important. And I'm so proud that I did it.
Yeah. There's that strength that maybe you didn't hear in the beginning, but yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. What about the boundaries? I mean, that in itself is an example of resetting some boundaries and reclaiming that, and time is what it sounds like you needed at that stage, even if nothing else but pure physical exhaustion in that time. So what have you learned over the years around boundaries for yourself?
Yeah, sure. The boundaries are also really tricky because I think grief, trauma, or just general life, there's a lot of busyness that we at times can be struggle to kind of figure out what we actually need. But there's also this analogy that you might have heard talking about rubber balls and glass balls. So work is a rubber ball. Family, friends and health are not. They're glass balls. So even if you have a sick day, the work is still there. It just patiently waits for you to return. And it's like, welcome back. Great to see you. But if you drop one of the glass balls, it shatters. And you can't, you can sticky tape it, but obviously it's never the same. So that's been a real, vision in my head, I suppose, about those boundaries. And like I said, really using love and joy as the driver for my boundaries. So it's tough to communicate the boundaries. And initially, and particularly in that returning to workspace, I unfortunately a colleague experienced loss at a similar time to me and returned to work just before I did. And she actually sent an email communicating her boundaries. And I actually asked if I could use it as a template, to sort of write my own. And in leadership, we also say that to be clear is to be kind.
Yes.
And that's exactly what this email was. It allowed me to communicate my needs, and that same clarity actually really assisted my colleagues to support me. It didn't mean that it wasn't hard, but at the time I actually didn't have the capability to communicate that in person. So I was able to use a different tool to share that. And that allowed, a little bit of space for myself, but also to support my colleagues in that process. And, it's those type of boundaries that have really helped. So I've just found that being honest and vulnerable with myself, even though, like I said, it's not easy and it takes so much courage and overthinking and everything to get to that point, but it's often met with love and support. And so despite the fear of thinking, am I going to upset anyone? I always come back to, well, I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me.
Yes.
And for our kids. And often, whether it be work, family or friends, it's often met with love.
Yes.
And just by saying what I need is enough for it to be granted.
Yes, because otherwise from the recipient perspective, it's a guessing game. Earlier in the conversation, we said around how there's no one best way. There's no, set way to deal with these scenarios. So, and the dynamics of the relationships and how people are always changing, there is no clarity unless, and for us to guess it, we're probably going to get it wrong. So if somebody can say, oh, these are the boundaries, this is what I'd like, this is what I'd really appreciate we don't have, then people can actually, with certainty, with a bit of confidence, respect that and know what steps to take. What kind of things were in the email, if you're able to share?
So one of them was saying that I might cry. And it could have been something completely unrelated. It might have been the way someone put their toasted sandwich in the sandwich press, because I'm like, oh my God, that's how Matt put his sandwich in, or something like that. Yes. So it could have been something completely unrelated. So I said, I might cry and that's okay.
Yeah.
Don't think that you've done anything to upset me. I've just got a lot of thoughts in my head, and, some of the triggers are unforeseen. And if I cry, I'll have a moment, I'll gather my thoughts and I'll come back. But I didn't want people to feel like they had to step on eggshells or that they had to do or not do certain things. Yes. And I really wanted to give them permission to just carry on.
That's a beautiful gift to them.
And to allow me to talk about Matt if I wanted to, but also allow me to remove myself from a conversation if it was too much. And I think ultimately the real, context of the email was to say, I don't know how I'm going to go. I'm coming back, but I don't know. And I think that is really what I needed to acknowledge for myself and to let colleagues know that, this is going to take some time.
Yeah. And in the context of the work that you're returning to, the company you're returning to, it was very known. People knew what had happened from the distance, not in the inner. But it wasn't like nobody knew you in the company. It was quite your family also working in the same company, which would have been a lot for them too, because people would have, that I can't even begin to think what it is for them too. But, today we're talking about your experience, but I love that. I think that's so powerful. I think it's so kind. I think it's so courageous and so important. that people realize, okay, you're not, I'm going to put in inverted commas, all fixed now. You haven't all recovered now. Of course not. But I think where the world carries on and years later we think, okay, great. This is this assumption of where people may be in their grief. And as you said, it's not linear. Does that then reset, I guess, reactivate a lot of different things for different reasons? Yeah.
Absolutely. And, for me, I was just so grateful that obviously not for the loss of my colleague, but for her to send that, I went, oh, that's actually what I really needed. So she probably unknowingly gave me this beautiful gift and tool that was such a powerful thing for me. And I knew that it would be helpful, but I have to say it's not until reflecting on it and going through that return to work process that I realised how much I needed that and how much that really saved me in a way through that process, which was incredibly hard.
Wow. And you then resharing, I guess, that experience, but also sharing your story, I believe, and that's why we do this podcast as well, I believe for the right person at the right time, you hearing your experiences will give them that gift as well. And I have so much love and respect for when people have gone through something just the most unimaginable, the courage and the generosity to show up and say, I want to share this because there might be someone out there that can benefit from this, which I just think is wildly generous and just beautiful.
Thank you. I tend to agree. I think it's incredible things that come into your life at certain moments. And, aside from the loss and the support that I have experienced, I've also gained new community and new friends through this. So, a fellow widow who is equal amounts of pain, but also we're on a journey of creating equal amounts of joy. It is truly fascinating how things come into your life when you need them the most.
Yes, and the power of community and connection, I feel like what I'm hearing there and through, say, our Premi journey, it was a similar thing. People don't experience the NICU. If you haven't experienced it, you just don't get it. And grief, becoming a young widow would be exactly the same, in the way that unless you've been there, you just don't get it. And so the power of not feeling alone and the connections and community within a niche experience, I suppose, one that we'd never wish upon another human. But the power of that, how has that community assisted you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that different level of support. And I do remember talking to you before the babies were born around, Ash, this is what might happen in NICU. And I was like, yeah, nodding along and sort of, absorbing it. But also I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it's not until you experience it firsthand. We can share stories, etc. But unless you're in it, that's when you truly get it. And I've often said to people now, I didn't understand grief until I was grieving. I thought I was being supportive and of course I was doing the best I could to support others, but I just didn't get it. And so I think that that's the same with this sort of new community, particularly this one friend is we just get it. And it's not that we have to rehash all the details. It's just this knowingness and support of each other, I think. And like you say, whether that be a NICU support or otherwise, just finding, your people, for lack of a better term, that's quite powerful.
Yes, I feel that's so important in any element of life, to find your tribe, your people, the sense of knowing that then we don't feel so isolated and alone.
Yeah, and same thing with that is, the practical steps of what you need of support. The community is the same. There are even there's organisations for multiple birth, groups. There's obviously, first-time mums groups and things, and, that doesn't suit everyone.
No.
So I guess also that takes courage to say, this isn't working for me, and that's okay. Maybe the next mother's group will or something, but I guess in a way it's like not settling and not just accepting, oh, well, I guess this is where I'm at. And, I do believe that there are people or things that come to you when you need it the most. So I'm, grateful for this friend of mine and the community that we've shared as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Ash, as I say, I'm so grateful for your generosity, your bravery, your courage to come on and share where life has taken you over the last 4 years. And what I'm going to ask you is, often I'll say, what's the kindest thing someone's done for you? But I'd actually I'd ask you, have you got some words of kindness that you can offer for someone else, whether it's connecting to one or many of your experiences right now? What could you share with the people who are listening today?
Yeah, I think I don't want to add advice or cliches for these people, but I do want to just say that I see you. I see the stumbles and the triumphs. And just by showing up one day at a time, even 10 minutes at a time or 1 hour, that is courage. And that strength is so admirable, even if you can't see it yet. But I also want to say thank you to those that are supporting someone, because I know from my own experience, we may not have the capability to say thank you or to even keep asking for that help. And I think that's because it means accepting that our loss and pain is real. But I just want to acknowledge those people in our lives because we truly appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. And I don't really have too many more words other than thank you. I feel extremely honoured that you've come on here today and shared your story. I feel extremely honoured that you've trusted me to hold the space for you, and I feel very honoured that I can call you a friend. And yeah, you're an incredible light in this world.
Thank you. I'm so grateful.
Thanks.
And now we can go off the recording and have a big cry.
Yeah, now we can stop. Thanks for joining us on the Lead with Courage podcast. We illuminate leadership, and it's our mission to inspire and grow the leaders of today to create a better tomorrow. We hope and trust that this episode has given you some insights and joy to empower you to live your biggest, best life. If you did enjoy the episode, we'd be so grateful for you to rate and share wherever you listen to this podcast. And until next time, go and lead with courage. Luminate Leadership is not a licensed mental health service or a substitute for professional mental health advice, treatment, or assessment. Any conversation in this podcast is general in nature, and if you're struggling, please see a healthcare professional or call Lifeline on 131114.